One of the political norms of America, it seems, is that a lot of people that would consider themselves left-wing are incredibly dissatisfied and frankly disgusted with the political system. It's a political system that historically, at least since the end of World War II, has only really been able to provide either right-wing to far right-wing politics or centrist to slightly left of center politics. But what we've seen in America, particularly yesterday, is that the cracks of that political norm are starting to take shape. And we saw a political earthquake in New York City that was so surprising and unexpected that even the people that pulled it off didn't expect things to go as well for them as it did. Yesterday, New York City held the first round of its Democratic primary for their candidate for mayor of New York City. And it was a very interesting race that was shaped by two men in particular. But before I get into that, a real quick point to mention is that the Democratic primary in New York for the mayor's office is essentially the election itself. Because with the current political climate in New York City, Republicans are not going to be getting elected there. So this Democratic primary was the real election. So this Democratic primary had a very crowded field, and it came down to two men, Zoran Mandani and Andrew Cuomo. These two men could not be more different from each other if they had tried. They represent complete polar opposites and extremes within the Democratic Party. Andrew Cuomo being an establishment figure, previously the governor of New York. His father was the governor of New York sometime before him, somebody who really represents what this idea is of a moderate Democrat. Zoran, by comparison, is the complete opposite. He is literally half Andrew Cuomo's age, and he is a well and true democratic socialist. He identifies as such. He's a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, and he essentially had no baggage. Unlike Cuomo, who had to resign from the office of governor because, well, he had almost a dozen allegations of sexual harassment against him. So the contrast here could not be more extreme. We have a fresh-faced progressive on one side, and then you have I shouldn't say decrepit, you have the old guard of the Democratic Party on the other side, represented by somebody who's part of a Democratic political dynasty within New York City. So a lot of people were interpreting this as a part of a battle that is raging within the Democratic Party at the moment, because the Democrats, at least in my opinion, have kind of been up shit creek without a paddle since Trump was elected, and there's no real clear strategy from them as to how they're going to act going ahead. And, well, the battle lines are simple. There are people who think the Democratic Party should become much more moderate, and people that think it should become much more left-wing in response to Trump's victory. So people were inferring what this was going to be. It was a moderate versus left, David versus Goliath story where you have a former governor trying to revive his political career well ahead in the polls, and then you have Zoran, this state assemblyman who's actually been in politics for only about 4 years now, who is a Muslim. He's a socialist. He is pro-Palestinian, and he doesn't have an assorted base of support broadly within the city. So a lot of people looked at this and thought, okay, by all political convention, this is going to be a cakewalk for Andrew Cuomo. But Zoran turned things around really quick. Zoran's campaign directly targeted young people and was very aggressive in how much it wanted to reform things within New York City. He was focusing massively on cost of living issues affecting working New Yorkers. We're talking about going after rent freezes, free buses, universal childcare, wanting to expand taxes on the wealthy in the city. It was a very openly left-wing platform, and it resonated with a lot of people who otherwise would be pretty disinterested in a mayoral race like this. And look, some of you might fairly be asking, why is this such a point of focus, and why are they talking about issues like this if we're talking about a mayor's race? Isn't this just local politics? And in most circumstances, when you're talking about mayor races, yes, that would be the case. But New York City and its municipal government are beyond comprehension. This is not a normal local government. This is effectively a state within a state. New York City, its municipal government, has an operating budget annually of over $100 billion. There are entire US states in America that don't come anywhere near that. So the mayor of New York City is a very unique position in American politics where it is technically a local race, but it functions more like a governor's race would anywhere else in the country. Zoran made fantastic use of social media during his campaign. On TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, everywhere online, you probably saw some of his stuff, and he quickly went from 1% in the polls at the start to just above 30% in the final days of the campaign. And he quickly became the clear and only alternative to Cuomo in this race. Now, Cuomo himself was consistently polling upwards of 40%, but the reason that things weren't just over and everything was discarded was because in New York, for party primaries, they use ranked choice voting, which is a system that we use here in Australia, or as we call it, preferential voting. This led to a really interesting situation where you had this crowded field of candidates, aside from Cuomo and Zoran. But the real conversation became, okay, who are these people going to direct their preferences to in this election as we go through the rounds? Because clearly nobody's going to get upwards of 50% in the first round. And Zoran made fantastic use of the system to show that he genuinely wanted a different style of politics in America. Because there was a third horse in this race, somebody who was above the rest of the pack, but behind both Zoran and Cuomo. And that was Brad Lander, New York City's comptroller, essentially the city's auditor. Now, Brad was a progressive candidate, not so much as Zoran, but certainly much more than Cuomo, and something that he and Zoran agreed on was that Cuomo should have nothing to do with political life anymore, and that the horrific allegations against him should disqualify him from in any way partaking in the political scene. So, unique in American politics, they came to an agreement. Zoran and Brad cross-endorsed each other. Or in Australian terms, they agreed to preference each other. Basically, they went out, they made their campaigns, and they were campaigning for themselves, but they said, please put this guy as your second option, ensuring that the progressive vote in this election, the votes would flow to one another. So it was no longer a question of if Zoran was going to beat Cuomo. The question was, will Brad and Zoran's votes together be enough in however many rounds of ranked choice voting to beat Cuomo? So as we were heading into the election, the final polling looked like Cuomo was going to get around 40% in the first round, Mandani was probably going to get around 30%, and then Lander was there probably picking up around like 10%. So it seemed that the progressives had like a balance against Cuomo, and it's going to come down to how all the other minor candidates in the field sent their preferences. That did not end up happening on election night. And I really quickly want to mention, Andrew Cuomo essentially had like a threat against the party, and that was the fact that he was going to run, or at least he was threatening to run in the general election under an independent banner against the Democrats if he didn't win. People assume that his argument would be, look, I won in the first round, Democrats clearly like me, I have enough support, I will run as an independent candidate if Zoran somehow beats me after we've done all the rounds of ranked choice voting. But that opportunity for him kind of disappeared. On election night, Zoran did not keep things close and competitive with Cuomo. He absolutely blew Cuomo out of the water and won the first round, beating Cuomo by 7 points. Zoran beat a man who outraised him by tens of millions of dollars from super PACs. I think $7 million alone was given to put together negative ads against Zoran, and it didn't do anything. This was a kick in the teeth for the Democratic establishment. They spent tens of millions of dollars to get a sex pest, allegedly, like Andrew Cuomo, back into elected office. They got Bill Clinton to come out and endorse him. They got Michael Bloomberg to come out and endorse him. They put everything they could to make sure that they kept Zoran out of office. And it was all for jack shit. Now, look, this might be surprising to some fellow Australians here, but with preference counts in America, it normally takes them about a week before they actually do it. It's not like here where we have preferential voting and then like immediately before they're even done, they start distributing preferences. Over there, it takes a while. So we won't have Zoran declared the official winner of the Democratic primary, I believe until July 1st. But this election is over. I mean, Brad Lander, Zoran's partner in here, his cross-endorsed, got 11% of the vote. And you would have to assume that most of his votes are going to flow to Zoran. He would only need like 60% of them, but he's going to get way more than that. So there's no real way for Cuomo at all to find a path to victory over these rounds of ranked choice voting. So Cuomo has kind of confirmed this of himself. He's basically conceded the primary entirely to Zoran. He knows that it's over. And the question now for Cuomo himself is whether or not he even bothers running, because this is such a pathetically awful performance for him that the idea he would then go ahead and try and run in the general as a independent or third party candidate, why would he risk the embarrassment even further? But broad picture, what is the takeaway from this? What should we derive from this as in terms of a message for the Democratic Party going forward on a nationwide level? Well, first of all, don't run candidates that, in my opinion, are weird sex creeps. That is never a good idea if you're the Democratic establishment, it seems. Young people don't particularly like them, nor do most people with normal functioning brains. In terms of where the Democratic Party should go from here, should they go more left-wing, I think there is a pretty good argument for that. I know that this is New York. It is a very left-wing city, and there is a left-wing voter base there. And of course, Andrew Cuomo was an awful candidate, historically so. But I do think there's an argument for a move to the left. What Zoran did, which was so impressive, is that he really energized young people to come out and vote, which has kind of been like the Democratic pitch for a while. Like, if we figure that out, all our other problems will go away. And turnout in this election, like in terms of the Democratic primary for the mayoral race, this is the highest it has been since, I believe, the 1990s, like 6 election cycles ago. And I think this is a really important point, because one of the reasons that I think Australian politics isn't that crazy in terms of the people that get elected and why there tends to be a lot more successful left-wing parties in Australia is compulsory voting levels the playing field in terms of generational turnout. This statement is going to sound like an exaggeration, but I am 100% serious when I say it. If people under the age of 30 in America voted at the same rate that people over the age of 60 do, it would completely reshape the entirety of the American political landscape forever. And Zoran proved that that is possible. Like, tens of thousands of new voters came out who were young people to vote in a mayoral party primary election. I believe 1 million people voted in this election. And a big part of that is the fact that this candidate understood how to talk to young people and made them want to get involved. And the consequence was that the establishment Democrat, with tens of millions of dollars more in funding, got blown out of the fucking water. Look, I don't think that Zoran's campaign would work everywhere. I mean, promising free public services in rural Idaho might not play that well with the most die-hard conservatives. But if you approach with sincerity and towards energizing young people, and most importantly, this is probably something that I should have mentioned a lot earlier, the genuine optimism that Zoran had in his campaign is something that the Democrats really need to understand actually makes people like you. Republicans and broader conservatives are great at running on the idea of hating something. It is like the core of their political being is a fear of some potential outcome, and that works great for them. Left-wing people, at least in my experience, are nowhere near as motivated to get involved purely on the basis of fear. There is an expectation that they want to be given a positive outlook or some vision to work towards. It's not about being afraid, it's about building something better. So do I expect Democrats to take a meaningful lesson from this and think about themselves and should they change? No. Democratic establishment is a stupid, idiotic, pathetic institution. And I don't expect it to learn, but it could. It is possible that the Democratic Party could look at this one beautiful shining moment and maybe appreciate and consider the possibility that if you offer a genuine positive vision that is optimistic and appeals to people who might otherwise not get involved in politics, then maybe the Democrats can try something new and they can try to actually win an election for once.